Hegemony or hegemony? Does it matter? Let's unbox some class warfare. Hello and welcome to The Lucky Roll, an eclectic channel for eclectic games, and today we're going to be unboxing Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory. Now this was a very interesting game when I read about it because it's basically it's a kind of a class faction based game that simulates the troubles within a nation. There's 4 factions or classes in the game. You have the working class, the middle class, the capitalist class and the state, and all are kind of dependent on each other, but also all are trying to kind of outdo each other. So in this game, the players are they represent one singular class and are trying to do that to their utmost benefit so they get the most victory points. I quite like the image as well, because you have here what I presume is the working class and the middle class. Here on the other side of the barrier, you have the capitalist class, and here you have the faceless state. Now the state is interestingly faceless, I think, because in 3-player games, no person plays the state. But in 4-player games, a 4th person is the actual state. So it's what's called an asymmetrical, politico-economic, card-driven board game that simulates a whole nation. So there's a lot in it. There's a very popular instruction video on it, which is about an hour and a half long, which kind of underlies the complexity of the game. But from what I can see, it's quite interesting because every faction is dependent on the other factions while simultaneously trying to exploit as much as they can from it. If you skew the balance too much, things start to collapse. So if you take too much from the state, the IMF comes in and kind of forces rules, which is bad for everyone. However, if you give too much, the capitalist class loses its profits. The working class gets too much, which is good obviously for the working class, but possibly bad for the state and bad for the middle class because they in turn need their own profit. So there's an interesting kind of push and pull system to it. But nevertheless, this is not a review, this is an unboxing. So I'm going to unbox this game and we'll see what we have inside. Now, unboxing the game for the very first time, we are greeted with the instruction book. Now, like I said, there was an hour and a half video on the instructions, and the instruction book itself has 39 pages. So it's a complex game in that there's a lot kind of tying into it. So it's because there's 4 distinct factions, there's 4 distinct ways of playing, but they do overlap a little bit, so it's not as complex as you may think. But there are 4-player boards, 4 factions, and there's a kind of a universal play board here. So it's interesting. It's a bit of a dense rule book, but it's not as daunting as you may think. There is obviously a certain section on each one of them. So you have the politics table, you have the state, you have the middle class, you have the capitalist, and you have the working class. So naturally, if you're working on one of those factions, you really only need to kind of read the rules in specific to that. You have the other rules in the appendices, rules questions, and card-related questions, which at least does give you a kind of a breakdown on some of the cards in play. So that is the actual rule book itself. You have here what seem to be player aid cards, and we have here state rule aid, which is another player aid card, which seems to be, yep. So there's a specific aid card, of course, for players. We'll have a look at the first ones here, which I think are just the kind of the card actions. So we have here the kind of the working class player aid and the scoring on either side. You have the middle class. Now, of course, these are different. So here, for example, you have a strike token and a kind of demonstration token. So part of the game is kind of building companies and businesses. So if there's not enough jobs for the working class, they can kind of force other players to do that. You don't see that here with the middle class, because in this game the middle class are kind of halfway between the working class and the capitalist class, and that they're also kind of job creators and company makers. And of course both have different scoring systems as well. You have here of course the capitalist class, and you have here the state. Now there's also kind of a round overview and a general intervention. Now one thing I want to point out is these are actually quite good quality. It's not cardboard, it's kind of a plastic paper. So obviously these are durable because they're going to be referred to a lot and no doubt handled a lot. So that's a good thing to see here, that there's good quality components. It's the same thing here with the state rule aid. This is kind of a plastic paper type of things that's kind of slightly waterproof. So obviously again, certainly in your first few games you're going to be referring to these quite a lot. And there is 4, of course: state, middle class, capitalist and working class. Again, all good quality, a little bit dense, but of course with a bit of preparation I have no doubt that you will be able to kind of get the game going. And it is only 4 players, so it's not like Twilight Imperium that you have 6 to 8 players, that all of whom you have to kind of get up to speed. So there's 4 kind of rule aids for players there. We have here the tokens. Now as you can see, these are interesting. These are the things that you can kind of sell and are commodities in the game. So these would be food, these would be luxury goods, and this would be healthcare. The actual token itself is good, simple quality. Thin cardboard. I mean, it's not extra thick, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. So those would be some of the tokens. We have here the education aspect, which is another resource. This is for the working class, which is a kind of a demonstration which forces people to have more companies in. This is the free market area. So it's interesting because in the game you don't have to just sell within your own nation per se. You can also kind of export to the international market, and goods that are sold on the free market don't have a tax on them, which affects the actual state player. So an interesting little aspect. These here are for policies. So depending on the faction, they can be pro-policy or anti-policy. So this would be the middle class being pro-policy, and on this side that would be against the policy. This is the version for the state, this is the version for the capitalists, and this is the version for the working class. These are kind of little tokens that if the state can kind of bring the state of play where education costs less than 5, they get a victory point every time someone takes from the state beneficiary pool an education token. Same thing here when it comes to healthcare. And on the other side, if you get in terms of kind of an idyllic state like say Finland or Sweden, where healthcare or education is free, you get the state will get 2 kind of bonus influence points. So the state wants to be as nice as possible, but of course if the state is providing healthcare, that means the middle class and the capitalist class can't sell healthcare or education to the working class or to the middle class. So a nice interesting kind of balancing act. These are just the currency, of course, so you've got hundreds and 50s. You also have here more currency, so you've got 20s, 10s, 5s and 1s. And you have here the other tokens. So these would be kind of tokens for the state in terms of, it might be a little bit quicker if I show you the state board to explain those tokens. So this would be the state player board, and you have 3 factions. So obviously the higher up you go here, the better you are for the state. What this token means is that you can kind of get 1 influence on the capitalist track, that the capitalists are happy with the state automatically if you have these tokens. These are the strike tokens for the working class. So if a company is not paying your workers enough wages, you can kind of slap a closed fist on it and stop it from working. You have here, again for the state, this is just extra influence for the working class, and extra influence here of course for the middle class. These are kind of cogs, machineries, operating tokens, so you just increase the productivity of certain companies, all of which will be in cards that we'll see in a little bit. And these essentially are just kind of extra storage spaces for warehouses and for different companies. Now we go to the player board. So obviously I've already shown you the state, so I'm just going to zoom out a little bit here. So it's fairly straightforward. You have a nice handy breakdown. This is the state's legitimacy with the working class, middle class, with the capitalists. The more up, the better. And of course, for every... This is the rate of pay as well. So if you can get the cost of healthcare and education down to 5 Voltaire, I think is the economics in this, you get a victory point. If you get it down to 0, you get extra influence with the middle class and the working class. But of course, the capitalists are not happy with you. This is just your storage area for food, storage area for luxury goods, and storage area for influence. Now, influence has an impact on the political aspect, which I'll talk about when we come to that part in the main board. This, of course, is the working class, so this is the population track, and of course, the more population you have, the more of a prerequisite you'll have, or more influence you have. This is the prosperity, and these are the trade unions. So if you have so many workers on the board in employment, you can form trade unions, which help you garner influence, which of course works again in terms of political voting. You have here, of course, the income and the goods and services. So in order to increase prosperity, you need to have so many goods and services to be able to feed to your population to increase their prosperity. The working class is fairly straightforward enough. The middle class is a kind of an amalgamation of the board between the capitalists and the working class, or between the capitalists and the working class. So you again have a population track because you have a series of middle class workers that'll be skilled. You have the items that you can also produce. So here, it's not just items and goods and services that you can kind of consume, you produce them. So, and here you have 9, 12, 15, 5, 8, 10, depending on, you set the prices and what you want to sell it at. So you can try and undermine the capitalists, or you can try and undermine the state, or if there's a shortage of the goods, you can try and be profiteering. And your prosperity is also affected. You have income and you have goods and services. And finally, we have the capitalists, which have revenue and capital, but no population. So it's the workers that would feed the capitalists. And here again, of course, is how much revenue you get in a specific turn. Gives you that many victory points. These are the 4 aspects of goods that you would produce: food, luxury, health, education. You set the prices, and influence that you can, of course, use in political lobbying and votes. This is the actual board itself, so I'm going to have to zoom out because it's a large board, but should be an interesting one. So essentially, the bottom part of the board is unemployed workers. So this is a pool where all the workers are kind of drawn from to fill up the companies. You have immigration, which is another way of getting workers in. You have here the middle class businesses. So you have up to 8. You have here the capitalist class, which is 9 businesses. You have the public sector here, which has 9 businesses for the state. And you have public services, which would be health, education, and max productivity. Now I'm just going to kind of fold the board a little bit because it's huge. Here in the middle, unfortunately, it would fold right on this part I need to explain, of course. Just bear with me. Here you have, of course, the state treasury. Here you have import costs. So there's always goods available to be bought. So if the capitalists or the middle class are trying to starve the working class or the state out of it, they can just buy the goods from abroad. So that's the leverage they would have in turn. These would be the export aspects. And you have here business deals, which kind of are unique ways of getting goods and services. And finally, at the top half of the board, you would have state benefits, which are interesting because the state, if it can provide benefits for the capitalists, for the middle class, and for the working class, would add to its advantage and get it influences. You have events, which of course shake things up. You have the vote results. You have tax multipliers. So this is an interesting thing. The lower down, the better for normal people, but bad for the state. And it's, of course, it's a 5-round game. Along here, you have the victory point markers. You have here the aspects of foreign trade. So there's a thing here in terms of policy. So you have socialism here on the left and neoliberalism on the right. So obviously with neoliberalism, it's kind of crappy for workers and ordinary working people. On the left, it's good for workers and ordinary middle-class working people. not so good for the capitalists. So you've got the two extremes, and you've got the cozy middle here, and it also applies in terms of foreign trade and in terms of immigration. So it's an asymmetrical board game in the sense that everyone keeps trying to kind of push things, policies, to where they want to go. So obviously taxation, the middle would be the sweet spot for the state, or well, high would be also good for the state, but if you do that, you're going to get undermined, and the populace is all going to work against you to try and bring the taxation down. If it's very low, it's the sweet spot for the capitalists, but the workers can't kind of keep that sustainable because they'll become dependent on the state. So a very interesting balancing game that I really like the sound of, and I really like the idea of seeing how applicable this is to real life. We have here the actual components. So every class has its own unique deck. So this, of course, is the deck for the working class. This, of course, I believe is the deck for the state. So these would be businesses, as you can see here. So as you can see in the businesses, you would have two different types of workers. You have the tall one, which is the middle class, and the short one, which is the working class. And you would have kind of color specific, which are specialities. So green would be trained in green jobs, but gray is kind of an unskilled worker. So it would also produce for food. If you have a manufacturing, it produces an extra food, and that, of course, is the rate of wages for people. So workers obviously don't want to be working for 15, 20 and 25. Of course, if the wages are higher, it's harder on the capitalists and the working class to kind of make a profit if ordinary working people and middle class people are getting a decent wage. And that, of course, is what you sell if you want to sell the company. That's how much you in turn would make. So that would be that seems to be some state companies. These would be, of course, be for the capitalists. My apologies, I screwed up. This is the state company, and this is the actual businesses. So as these come up, I presume they're drawn and divvied out to different players. These would be the state cards, which would have, say, things like radical reforms. This would be the hegemony distinct deck for the middle class, and these, of course, would be policies of publicly owned companies. You have here the tokens, which are nice wooden ones. So this, of course, will be the capitalist, nice little quadrily wooden tokens. They seem to be printed on, and that seems to be taxation and percentages. So I'll put those back. We have plenty of baggies, which is a good thing. We have also here white tokens. So these are used generally to donate the prices of goods and services. We have here different color tokens. So blue, obviously capitalist, yellow, middle class, red, working class, and purple will be influence. So each faction would have a certain amount of influence. All of these are put into this little bag, which is how you cast votes. So depending on what policy is being passed, you draw so many random cubes, and depending on the faction preference and how many cubes they draw out is whether or not the bill gets passed. These would be the workers. So again, nice interesting little printed play pieces. So you have here, of course, a middle class worker, which is nice and tall, and I don't see any. Yep, the working class lads are over here in their own separate bag. So they're slightly smaller, but as you can see, there's a lot of little workers here that you can place on the board. So this would be an unskilled worker, and this would be a skilled middle class person. So it's quite interesting because they do have them designated in height. Now the skill thing isn't just color based. You can also have working class characters with specific skills. And the last thing we have here is just kind of policy tokens. So these would be color specific again. So red would, if you place the red on a part in the fiscal board, or say if you want to kind of try and increase wages for workers, you would put this down on that part of the board, saying that that's what you want to be voted on. This would donate or designate what the current actual policy is. And finally, we have other cards here, which would be the immigration cards. So every turn you turn one of these over, and you would get one unskilled worker and one skilled middle class worker. So a very interesting little game with lots of variability and lots of kind of pulling and pushing. So I mean, even here now on the back of these cards, this would be a national public broadcasting unit. So in order to kind of get this working, you get 4 influence when you produce it, and you need 3 sets of workers at least to do it, and they cost a significant amount. With this one, it's a faction card, so reveal voting cubes from the bag until you reveal 3 cubes of other classes. Replace them with your voting cubes and return all revealed cubes to the bag. So that's quite interesting in the sense that you can kind of askew the vote a little bit. So of course there is a card drafting aspect to it, so it's not just strategy, there is a little bit of kind of play. So that, ladies and gentlemen, was the unboxing of Hegemony, where you lead your class to victory. A very interesting game, one I'm very much looking forward to trying out, but I think would have to be tried out a couple of times to do it justice. Nevertheless, it's a game that's supposed to last from 120 minutes to 180 minutes, so even though it's slightly complex and there's a lot at play, I think as soon as players grasp the rules, they can kind of get on with it. And there is, of course, only 5 rounds in the actual game. So it's not going to turn out to be an epic all-night session like, say, Twilight Imperium or anything like that. So, as always, if you enjoyed these videos, please like, subscribe, all that good YouTube stuff. And until next time, good luck, God bless, and stay safe.